Hey, everybody, welcome back to Practical Liberty. My name's Henry Bingaman, and today I have a guest who has done a private session for my freelance community on saving on your taxes, Matthew Sercely. He's the founder of Agorist Tax Advice. He's the founder of the new podcast and the host of the new podcast, It Depends, which is a hilarious name. I realized as soon as I saw it because he says that every 5 minutes when you ask him a question. And he's also a working attorney. So, Matthew, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, agorist tax advice. You're an agorist attorney. My understanding of agorism is basically not following laws. It's kind of like civil disobedience or non-compliance. So, how do you kind of square those two terms in your head?
So some agorists just ignore laws. I look at it more like judo. I'm going to use the government's laws against them. And malicious compliance is one of my favorite things to do. It's like, oh, the rule is this. Fine, I'll follow your stupid rule, even though you don't want me to. No one actually follows this rule, but I'm going to follow this rule just to spite you. Well, there's so much tax stuff that it's like, as long as you just document it properly, as long as you put numbers in the right boxes, it affects how much money you owe. So it's like, I mean, I know a lot of people who are agorists don't pay taxes at all. I'm not willing to take that risk. But if, I can do 10 minutes of work and save $1,000 in taxes, I'm going to do that. And so it's using their rules against them as much as possible.
So it's kind of using the tools of the enemy to fight them. I like it. I mean, there's how many pages can anybody actually? I know we talked in our conversation in the community, the Breaking Free community, about how many pages of tax code there are, which is some insane number. Do you remember that number off the top of your head?
I don't. It's tens of thousands of pages. I mean,
Right.
it's just absurd. There is no human being who has actually read the tax code. And basically, like, they change it so often that even if you were to start and like go through it, you wouldn't be able to finish before they changed it. And a lot of these changes are really like hard to follow because like maybe they amend the law and it's like, okay, section this, subsection this, paragraph this, add these 4 words. Well, so you
Right.
got to go back to that section and read what those 4-word changes is, but maybe then you have to go and look at, well, what were the definitions for this section again? Because even things like what is a person can depend on what section you're in. Maybe a person means a human being. Maybe it means a human being or a corporation or a partnership or an LLC. Maybe it means all those people plus a state. Maybe it means all those things plus a city, but not a state. Different parts of the tax code define the same thing differently. And so just reading like a single line, you don't know anything about it. You usually need to read like 10 or 20 pages to understand what the heck something is.
Right. And then there could be another 10 or 20 pages somewhere else in some other code that nullifies everything that was in the first 10 or 20 pages. So
and then we get to, there are also separate regulations the IRS puts out and separate explanations the IRS puts out. And then there's tax court rulings, which may say how certain parts of the tax code should be interpreted. So no, it's impossible for anybody to know everything about taxes. It's why everyone who does taxes or tax advice tends to narrow their focus to certain areas. And it's why I love it. The Wall Street Journal does a contest for accountants every year where they give like 50 accountants the exact same information. Family of 4 doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this, doing this. They've done this for like 40 years. And I think twice or 3 times in the last 40 years, they've had 2 accountants come up with the same number.
So
because it just depends on how you fill it out.
exactly. So how, with all this complication, and that's just the tax code, right? There's another trillion pages of laws and federal laws and regulations and everything on top of that. So how is this law, like, I don't understand how people consider it legitimate when it's literally impossible for everyone to follow all the laws all the time. You can't even know them. So isn't there, like, I don't know, I guess, how does this system even work? Is it just up to the arbitrary whims of whatever prosecutor? And doesn't that just mean that, I don't know, it doesn't seem like we're living under the rule of law like everybody likes to think if you can't even know all the laws?
Pretty much. I'm actually laughing. I don't know if you listened to it, but my very first episode of my podcast is on ignorance of the law and how everyone is ignorant of the law because there are so many laws and it's impossible to have, it's impossible to probably know all the laws of your city, let alone the county, the state, and the country. And as I go into in that episode, there's even like there are times when there's international or foreign laws that are in effect in the United States. Like the Endangered Species Act makes it illegal for people to buy or sell like body parts of animals that are protected in like any country on our earth. So maybe we don't have an animal on the Endangered Species Act, but if France has it on their equivalent, our law says it's illegal to buy or sell that. So yeah, it is absolutely up to prosecutors and juries. At some point, the juries are one of the biggest protections. I'm a big believer in criminal law, at least, as to what's called jury nullification, where they basically say, we don't care what the law is. It's dumb in this case. We're not going to follow it in this case, and we're going to find the person not guilty.
Yeah, one of the things that I like the idea of forcing more things to go to a jury trial, because there's literally they depend, the criminal justice system in America depends on like what do they call it, settlements or
Plea bargains.
yeah, plea bargains, exactly. Thank you. Because if everything went to trial, there literally would be backlog for decades for anyone to get their case heard, and they would be forced to simplify the laws. Because I don't think it's going to happen, because it's such a big stick that they can hold over your head with a plea bargain for any even petty crimes, that nobody wants to take that risk. But I don't know, the system seems ripe to implode, but it hasn't yet. So who knows?
Well, and in the civil case, it is settlements as well. And the civil courts are just in the same case. I mean, if even I've seen things like if 3% of cases went to trial, either federal or either criminal or civil, yeah, backlogs would be years longer. But for every individual, it's a rational choice. I
Right.
mean, most of my job, my day job for most of my life has been personal injury. So I represent people who are injured in car wrecks or dog bites or slip and falls. And there are absolutely times where it's like, okay, we think we should get $50,000. Well, they're offering $49,000 today. So we could take the 49 today, or we could wait to trial, which may be 6 months or a year in the future, and we think we'll get 50. Well, obviously we'll take the 49. Like it just makes sense to be done with it. Same thing happens in criminal cases. I haven't ever practiced criminal law since I've been licensed, but I did in law school work at a public defender's office. And the vast majority of our work was getting people out on bail and then negotiating plea bargains. And a lot of the time, like flat out, I actually got to try a case under somebody else's license, and it was not a good case. We had advised the client to take the plea bargain, and he refused to do it, and he was found guilty. And the judge, when sentencing him, basically flat out said, "Well, the median time you should serve is, I think it was 60 days, but I'm going to give you the maximum of 90 days because you came in here and you lied about what happened." And it's like, well, maybe he did lie, maybe he didn't die. He certainly wasn't being charged with perjury, but his story, the judge didn't find credible. But if he had taken the plea bargain, he would have gotten 30 days. And so it's like he was punished for going to trial. And that, and again, in the case of 30 days versus 90 days, like you're kind of screwed after 30 days anyway, short term. Like you just lost your job, you just lost your apartment, you probably lost your car if there was a note. So like 30 versus 90 days may not actually be that big of a difference. But if it's like 1 year versus 10 years, well, there's a lot of innocent people who take plea bargains because they don't want to risk the 10-year sentence. And it's not supposed to happen, but there are absolutely prosecutors who do things like, hey, we've charged you with these things and you can take it for 5 years or risk 15 years. Oh, but if you go to trial, we're going to charge your son and your wife and your daughter and try to send them to prison too.
I mean, that's
Well,
just pure barbarism at that point. Like that's not.
Well, and it's flat out illegal. For a prosecutor to do that, it's illegal. But think of what are the individual incentives? Like, unless you have a recording of that, you can't prove they did it. Even if you can, well, as an attorney, you just screwed every client you have in the future, because maybe prosecutors won't make you the same offers for your clients. And if you as the client, well, okay, now you don't get the plea bargain, so you're still potentially screwed yourself. No, there's actually a great essay, and it's something I'm planning on doing on my podcast, a commentary on it. It's called The Myth of the Rule of Law. And it basically talks about how there is no rule of law, and it's a flat out myth. It's just as mythical as Zeus. Everything is based on, or so much of it is based on who the prosecutor just chooses to prosecute. And yeah, there's, sometimes they go after high profile targets just to prove they'll do it. Sometimes they go after easy targets because that's easier. But a lot of prosecutors, what they care most about is they care about their numbers. And well, I shouldn't say that. I know good prosecutors. I know prosecutors who actually care about justice and doing the right thing. But the political prosecutors, especially a lot of the ones who want to be DA, they care about their numbers because that's what they run on. Oh, I have a 99.8% conviction rate. Look at what a good job I'm doing. Like at some point, I'm like, if you're really doing your job, shouldn't you have something closer to like maybe a 90% conviction rate? Like if it's 20%, you're just a bad lawyer. But like if it's 90%, okay, you're actually putting some things in front of the jury that you're confident about, but maybe you're wrong, maybe the jury doesn't believe you, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, there are innocent people, and you should have the humility to say, I got this one wrong, especially when it's somebody else's life on the line. It's the height of arrogance, and I don't even know, it's sociopathic almost to be willing to sacrifice other people for your own pride, essentially. At that point, it's gross.
And there are so many high profile cases where we know what happened. The Michael Nifong and the Duke NonCase happened. Oh man, that was like 20 years ago now. But for those who don't remember, there was a party that the Duke lacrosse team was having, and inappropriate things happened there. There was drug use, there were strippers. Like, I would not have wanted my kids there. But one of the strippers said that she was assaulted by 3 of the players on the team. And everyone assumed that, well, these people must have been guilty because we believe the women. And what ended up happening is the prosecutor ended up going after them hard, like super, super hard, because he was in an election. And he was really afraid he was going to lose because, like, the area around Duke is very, very, very poor, mostly African American. And then you have this, like, super rich elite college in the middle of the county. And he had issues where he was seen as not being, fair to Black people and fair to the local community, and was giving the people coming into the college special treatment. So he was trying to make a point. No, I'll go after them. I'll trust the local going after them. And it was things like there were the initial identification was coached. And then like one of the people managed to actually prove they weren't there. Like they had an ATM camera video of them getting money from an ATM. And like still the prosecutor didn't dismiss against that guy, like for a while. And so like finally, like the attorney general took over the case and actually issued a finding of actual innocence, which you can't do in every state. But basically it's like, no, this isn't even like a not guilty, like we can't prove it. It's like this didn't happen or these guys didn't do it. And how was that prosecutor punished? So he lost his license and he was sentenced to 1 day in jail for contempt of court.
And I mean, that's even more than a lot of attorneys get for that type of action.
Oh, he was like the first prosecutor to actually get jail time for what they did as a prosecutor in something like a decade.
Yeah, it's gross. I remember I'm gonna piss a lot of people off with this, but watching some of the Rittenhouse case a couple years ago, and that Bingler was the prosecutor, I believe was his name, and he just did so many things that were blatantly unethical, and it appeared to me like he was lying about things and misrepresenting things that he should have known were false, but nothing happened. I mean, Rittenhouse got off on that case, but the actions of that prosecutor were so gross and it was so clearly politically motivated that I don't know, there's nobody to police the police in this case. That's one of the problems with public justice systems, that there's just no accountability other than quote unquote democracy. But the press runs the democracy in a lot of ways. So there's no accountability for these people. So I don't know. Is there any way to fix this?
There are ways to improve the system. I won't fix it, but there are ways to improve it. I do want to say I followed the Rittenhouse case generally. I don't actually know if the prosecutor did anything like truly technically unethical, other than like the prosecution certainly looked political. Like Come on, there's seriously evidence here of self-defense, and in theory, prosecutors, like, they're not supposed to take close cases. Like, that's part of the job. Is in theory, you take cases you're confident about because the goal is justice, not convictions. One big problem with the current legal system, and this applies to cops, but even more so to prosecutors, are there are various immunities where you can't even sue them. And so a lot of people in the freedom community know about qualified immunity, where to sue any sort of state employee in federal court, you need to show that not only did they violate your rights, but that there's some case that says that that was a violation of your rights. And so this can get so absurd that literally there was one person who was surrendering to the cops and was lying down on the ground, hands behind his head, and the cops sicked their dog on him anyway. And so there was a case saying, no, you can't do that. That's a violation of his rights. He surrendered. That's excessive force. Well, like 10 years later, some guy surrendered by kneeling down and putting his hands behind his head. And the dogs sicked their dogs on him. And the court said, no, that's a totally different situation than surrendering or lying down on the ground. They didn't know they couldn't do it in this case. No, your suit can't go forward.
Jeez.
But as bad as that is, and frankly, there are, I would say at this point, probably the vast majority of the federal judiciary does not like qualified immunity. Like they wish they could get rid of it. They wish the Supreme Court would get rid of it. But there's something even worse with prosecutors, which is called prosecutorial immunity. And it's near the absolute immunity. You could have a recording of them saying, I know this person is innocent, and I'm prosecuting them because they didn't pay me a bribe. And you can't sue them for the prosecution. You can't sue them for anything they did as a prosecutor. Now, the very narrow exception, and this did come up in the Duke case, the prosecutor actually took over the investigation. And so when he was doing the investigation, he was acting more as a police officer. And so they were able to actually successfully sue that prosecutor for what he did as the investigator. But literally, it's essentially impossible to sue a prosecutor. I think there have been something like a dozen cases that have successfully gotten to trial or gotten a settlement in the past 4 or 5 years.
I mean, why would that law even exist? It's not like we would assume prosecutors are the perfect people, and the one exception of all of humanity is a prosecutor. How does something like that get on the books?
Well, so first of all, it's not even a law in the way most people mean it. It was something the Supreme Court carved out as an exception to the existing statutes called 1983 in the federal code. And they say that, well, this was part of the common law that you couldn't sue prosecutors for what they did, so we're just assuming this is part of it. Now, the justification for it is, particularly with prosecutors, if you let people sue them, well, wouldn't like half of the prisoners they put in jail try to sue them? And so it's like, well, maybe, but fine. Maybe like, wouldn't the solution maybe then be, okay, people who actually get convicted can't sue them? Like, that's still not ideal. I still think, because there are wrongful convictions,
Right.
But it's like, okay, but it will make prosecutors afraid to take close cut cases, because if the person's not guilty, they'll get sued. It's like, you already sold me. You don't need to walk past the sale. Like, that's a good thing. So the whole justification of it with prosecutors is, we don't want them wasting their time on a bunch of civil suits when they should be working as a prosecutor. And I'd certainly, especially because it is so easy to file a lawsuit, and do what I refer to as lawfare. Like, the system needs to be fixed for that, but the fix isn't just don't let people sue corrupt officials. The fix is fix the legal system, which, I mean, easier said than done. But it's a truly crazy system, and I don't know any, especially any attorneys who know about this stuff. Like, it's all just super weird. And people think, oh, laws are created by Congress or my local representatives in the state getting together, and they talk about things and they write it up and they pass a law. It's like, that's not how any laws have been passed in decades. A lot of the laws that get passed are passed by various administrative agencies, and they're regulations, but they have the force of law. You can go to prison for violating some of them. You can be bankrupted by fines for violating some of them. And it's like, oh yeah, this guy wrote this, regulation, and it has the force of law. And even when they break their own rules, they can have the force of law. So our favorite government agency is probably the TSA, right?
Sure.
I mean, people hate it more than the IRS. That's how popular TSA is. Well, I mean, I remember when they put the various news type scanners in, which I guess are 15 years old or older now. But they just put those in, like, they made a decision, and like a month later they were in place. Well, that's not legal. The law says if they're going to change the way they do things or change regulations and what people are required to do, they need to do what's called notice and comment. They need to put out a proposed regulation. Typically, they need to give people at least 3 months, and in a lot of cases longer, to make comments about, here are problems with this. And it could be as simple as, hey, you have a typo and that does bad things, or it could be like, there's safety concerns or privacy concerns or cost concerns. Or it could be, hey, this is unconstitutional for the following reasons. And then depending on the comments, the agencies actually do need to like address some of those comments if they want the regulation to go into effect. Well, they didn't do that. They just put it into effect. And so somebody sued them. And there was like 3 or 4 years after they went into effect, like, hey, you didn't follow the rules for this. I just realized that. We're going to sue you. And so the federal judge was like, yes, you absolutely did not follow the rules, but this is a national security issue. So we'll leave them in effect for now while you go do the notice and comment rules. And then like 6 months later, the person who filed the lawsuit went back to the judge is like, they haven't done it yet, Your Honor. They still haven't done the notice and comment period. And so the judge brought them in and basically was like, okay, you have like 1 month to get this started. And I don't remember the actual time, but I want this started in this time period. And I can't remember all the details of the story, but I think it took a third time of the judge telling them, you will do this. But the whole time the judge left the regulation in effect when they had just completely violated the law, obviously, about what they were doing. But the judge basically said, you violated the law, but I mean, we all know what's going to happen. We just need to dot our I's and cross our T's.
I mean, so I guess this whole law thing, that's a mess, right? There's no real accountability. These agencies, I guess that was kind of under the Patriot Act. So the Patriot Act gives so many people a blank check. But what attracted you to working in the law profession with this giant tangled mess of incomprehensible laws and regulations? Like what made you want to get into that minefield?
There were really two different things that happened. Maybe 2.5 different things. One was when I was 17 years old, I was in a very, very serious boating accident. Like I ended up in the hospital for over 6 weeks. I broke multiple bones. I had multiple surgeries. I still have some medical issues related to that today and a lot of dental issues because I broke my jaw. And I did not really like the job my attorney did for me. And I wanted to help other people by doing better. And by the way, I have, if I had contact information, I would apologize to him for thinking that because he actually did do a decent job. I just, in my ignorance, thought he had done a bad job. The other thing that happened was I was actually a math major, computer science minor in college. I mean, I'm a tech guy. I'm a nerd, and my plan was to be a college professor teaching math. That's what I wanted to do. And then to have a good chance of getting into a PhD program, I needed to get not a bachelor in arts, but a bachelor in science, a BS degree. And to get a BS degree, I had to do a math research project. And the normal way of doing that is you apply to various programs and do it over the summer. And I didn't get selected for any of those programs. And so while it would have still been possible to get the BS degree, it would have been hellish. Like it would have been basically doing the equivalent of a 40-hour-a-week job for 3 to 4 months while doing my senior year, like a semester of my senior year. So it was like, okay, that's not going to work. Frankly, I don't want to be a professor that much. I'll figure something out. And at the same time, I was getting really into libertarianism. Like I had kind of gotten into it, I think the summer between my sophomore and junior year, but I got way more into it in junior year of college. And then was like talking with somebody who was also a math major at another school, but a guy I went to high school with, and he was like, people who do like math and hard sciences do really, really well in law school. Like I'm going to law school, and I don't plan on practicing law forever, but like I'll go for like 5 years, make a bunch of money, and then do whatever I want. And so it was like, hey, I could do a lot of good for the liberty movement as an attorney. And so like there's that goal, but a lot of that again, it was ignorance. It was like, oh, I'm going to do constitutional law, and I'm going to argue in front of, probably not the Supreme Court. I wasn't that egoistic, but it was like, oh, I'll work for somebody like the Institute for Justice, which I didn't even know existed at the time. But they're a good group. If you're a libertarian and you want something like the ACLU that's better than the ACLU, the Institute for Justice is a good group. But again, a lot of it was ignorance, and I just wanted to improve the world and thought I could do that as an attorney. And so I go to law school. I get really disillusioned. I almost drop out, just because it was obviously not what I wanted to do. But kind of some of it was, well, I'm here. I have a good scholarship, so it's not cost me a lot of money. Might as well get the degree and then see what happens. Then, of course, I graduate, and there are no jobs doing constitutional law for a brand new grad if you want to make money. And like literally, like the jobs I could have gotten doing what I wanted to do would have paid $20,000 or $30,000 a year.
Hmm.
And so it's like literally I could have taken my math degree, gotten a job as a teacher, and made 40 grand a year. So, just out of the like, well, I don't want to be poor, so I got to find something to do. So hey, I'll get a job. And I really wanted to do more criminal defense again, because I figured, well, even if that's not a lot of constitutional work, like I'll help individuals, then I could do some good. But again, it's really hard to get into that if you're not either working at the prosecutor's office or the public defender's office. And I wasn't really willing to do either of those things as a liberty-minded person. So I ended up getting a job working in personal injury. And at first I didn't love it. I didn't even like it, but I was good at it. And then over time, as I learned more and as I met better people, went to better firms, I actually did come to overall love it. Like there are days I don't like doing that sort of work. But the vast majority of the time, like especially when I can help somebody who's really hurt and I can get them, at least 10% closer to justice than somebody else who would have been working on the case, I feel really good about myself. But yeah, long story short, it was mostly ignorance.
So you said
and
you said you really like your work now. I think a lot of people think when you hear personal injury, the ambulance chaser, they're looking at somebody, they're going out and they find somebody to intentionally trip over somebody's sidewalk and sue them, right? There's a wide range of people in that space. So what are the kinds of cases that you feel satisfied taking on, I guess?
So there are laws and regulations where I cannot contact an injured person and ask them to hire me. Like they have to come to me and contact me before I can even talk to them. It's a crime called solicitation. Interestingly enough, for an attorney to do that. Now, that applies to people who are going to pursue a case, not defend a case. It's totally legal. If you get sued for people to send you stuff, or if you get a traffic ticket, well, to defend you, yeah, they can contact you, and they will in a lot of states. And this is state by state, by the way. Every state has their own laws as to what is and is not allowed. But a lot of the work I do, most of my career was simple car wrecks, fender benders, or a little bit more than that. And, the fact of the matter is I'm in Dallas. There's something like 1 million car wrecks in Dallas in a year. Of that 1 million car wrecks, it's something like, and again, we don't know the exact number, but it's something like 50,000 to 100,000 where somebody gets injured bad enough they need some sort of medical care. Of those, a lot of them is, okay, I need to go to the hospital and get, some muscle relaxers. Maybe I need, a week of physical therapy or chiropractic treatment and I'll be fine. But some of them aren't that. I mean, people do get really badly hurt, and people can get badly hurt even if there's not a lot of damage to the vehicle. Like I represented somebody who you could not see any damage to the vehicle, but the way the car wreck happened, they hit their elbow against the glass and they broke their arm. It's like, obviously they got hurt. They have a broken bone. The other thing is that like cars are really good at protecting people when we're sitting in them correctly. when our back's against the seat, when the headrest is adjusted, when we're facing forward, and when we're hit from behind. But if somebody is turned to the left or turned to the right looking in their mirror when they get hit, it's a lot easier still for someone's neck to get messed up. And there are a lot of doctors who will say, oh, well, you can't really hurt your lower back in a car. Well, it's true. In a minor car wreck, if you don't have existing back problems and you get hit from behind, it's really hard for your lower back to get hurt if you're flush against the back seat. But the second your back comes even a little bit off the back seat, because again, maybe you're looking to the side, maybe you're looking behind you, maybe you're yelling at your kid who's being too loud in the back seat, whatever, the seat does almost nothing to protect your lower back. So, I mean, most of my career, 90% of my career is back injuries in car wrecks. As I've gotten to be better, I've gotten to work on cases where people are more seriously injured. So a lot of what I do today in personal injury is, 18-wheelers or drunk drivers hitting people, or cases where it's like you look at the car and it's like, who died? But not all of them. I mean, I have cases right now where it's a car wreck in a parking lot. Now, somebody was going like 25 miles an hour and T-boned somebody else, so it wasn't exactly a low speed impact. But it's not like they're crippled or anything. But I've worked some very interesting cases. I've worked multiple cases where someone's actually broken their foot in a car wreck because basically they were jamming on the brakes so hard to avoid being pushed into the car in front of them. They actually managed to basically break their own foot. I've worked on cases where people have. It's actually interesting. For most of my career, I worked on more cases where people died than where people had broken bones, and that's because it's like cars do such a good job of protecting you. Like once you get hurt, like there's actually a decent chance you're going to die.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've worked lots of different types of cases. I've worked, and I currently have a dog attack case. I have worked cases where there are slip and falls, and again, some slip and falls I've worked on, and I was kind of like, did you not see like the huge puddle? But on the other hand, like if it's a 6-inch spot of pickle juice from a broken bottle in a grocery store, like you got the card, it's pretty easy to miss that, and if you fall, you can hurt yourself. And legally, the store may or may not be at fault for that, but when they are, especially like, hey, that spill was there for like 4 hours, you couldn't clean it up, I have no problem going after somebody. Now, I've had a few clients who I flat out caught committing fraud, and attorneys, almost all the attorneys, when they find that, they get it out of the case. Because I only get paid when I get money for the client.
Right.
Well, if it's obviously a bullshit case, I'm not going to get paid. So I don't want to waste my time on it. And even worse, like, I don't want to spend money from the firm because, like, if I got to do stuff, that costs money. So, the very interest of plaintiff attorneys means we really don't want to do BS cases most of the time. And frankly, most of the time, and this is not necessarily personal injury, but most of the time there are plaintiff attorneys doing kind of BS cases. Going back, it's because there's some sort of dumb regulation. So there's this huge industry of lawyers who find somebody who's disabled and they sue hotels all over the countries for not following the disability guidelines.
Right.
Even though the person has no interest in actually going to that hotel, but multiple courts have said, well, anybody who's disabled has the right to sue for this. And, it's not uncommon to settle those cases for $5 or $10,000 for the disabled person and maybe another $5 to $10,000 for the attorney. And it's like, well, that's obviously like bullshit. Like, again, it's one thing, and I don't think there should be an American Disabilities Act, but there are certainly contractual things and safety things that should be followed still. Like if you go to a hotel and especially like you tell them, hey, I am in a wheelchair, I need a wheelchair accessible, bathroom, and they don't give you one, and like you can't go someplace else, maybe because it's a small town, so you have to use it, you get hurt. Well, that is on the hotel. And I want somebody to pursue that. But again, like you don't have one of these chairs to put somebody into the pool if they can't use the ladder. It's like you don't have a right to do that. And if you care about that, like don't stay someplace that doesn't have it, not sue them for not following it.
Yeah, those are largely things that the market would fix if you just let the market work. That there would be people, if there's enough of a population that wants that, they're going to make the handicap accessible. So you don't really need the ADA to do any of that stuff. It's
And like, I'm not going to say the ADA didn't do some good, especially there's a lot of laws, and again, as a libertarian, I'm still against them, but there's a lot of laws that it's like, okay, there was a problem, and this did help solve the problem temporarily. Like the 1960s Civil Rights Act did a lot of good, I think, in the 60s. I don't think it's doing a lot of good today. In fact, I think it's doing harm today. But there was so much racism, there was so much, prejudice against Black people, and like there were lots of people who wanted to, say, rent a hotel to a Black person, but if they did, like they'd worry about like getting lynched by people in their town.
right.
And so the Civil Rights Act basically said, hey guys, like I don't want to rent to them, but the feds are going to come after me if I don't. Let me just do it. And so there are certainly individual cases where good things came of it. I'm not sure it was necessary. And again, I think on net, certainly by now, it's been harmful. But I'm not such a, Kool-Aid drinking libertarian anarchist to say that, laws only do bad. Like there are
Yeah,
times
it's
that good things happen. It's just obvious. I think long term, they're almost always bad, other than laws against murder and something probably are generally good. But all these regulations, I think, are overall a net negative, even if in the short term they have a positive.
yeah, the trade-offs there over the long run don't work out in people's favor, even though let's say like the ADA did force people to put handicap ramps and make the world easier for people in wheelchairs, which is great. It also made an entire army of petty tyrants that, when you're doing a construction project, come in and cost you $5,000 to move doorknobs 4 inches lower, when it doesn't, except in one rare circumstance, it wouldn't matter to a single person that ever enters that building. So they just can make people's lives miserable if they want to. But it did force, and the Civil Rights Act forced a cultural change in the South, or allowed a cultural change to take place. So yeah, there's upsides and downsides, but I don't know. Overall, the consequences seem to be negative over the long run in most of these things.
Yeah, and one of the things, and this alone would make things a lot better, is if just every single law would automatically sunset after 10 years. And then to make sure they don't just like repass it, like just make whatever, Congress critter or, representative or senator who wants to propose a bill, they have to read it out loud in its entirety on the floor. If you just made them read the bill and it could only last for 10 years, well, they'd only really have time to pass a lot of the important stuff. And even if they got through something maybe really bad, like say the Patriot Act, like in 10 years, they're probably not going to want to go through that again because there's not a lot of benefit to doing it, and they don't want to waste their time reading through it.
But the special interest will make sure that never happens unless there's some massive cultural change.
No, and I mean, even if we could somehow amend the Constitution to do that, and we never could, I'm sure some court would interpret it as, not saying what it says.
Right. That's a part of the myth of the rule of law, which you mentioned earlier, is it's always up to interpretation. There is no hard, perfect standard, because you're using language, and language is open to interpretation almost no matter what.
Well, and so here's a great example of that. So the Constitution says, for any federal charges, you have a right to a jury trial for a criminal offense. Well, the courts have interpreted that to be, oh no, that's only for serious offenses. As long as you can't do more than 6 months in jail, you don't have a right to a jury. I was like, I'm sorry, I think 6 months in jail is a pretty serious punishment. Like, I think a day in jail is a pretty serious punishment. And even worse, maybe you have 6 charges against you. Well, if they're each a max of 6 months, you can be convicted of all of them and serve 3 years. Because each of the individual charges was only 6 months. And again, that's like as black and white as you can get almost in the Constitution. But it's like, oh no, that's not what they meant. That it didn't apply to petty crimes. It only applied to serious crimes.
Yeah, it's crazy how the law works or doesn't work is a better description. But so, all right, you're the reason I know of you is because of agoristaxadvice.com, your tax advisory service, which you're not doing tax law, you're not doing accounting, but you're setting people up to save money on their taxes long term, right? You're helping people set up their businesses and lives in a way that saves money. How did you get from personal injury to tax advice?
It's been a long and winding path. One thing was I was actually really good at tax law in law school. I took a tax law class, and I think that may have been my only A+ I got in law school. And I was really good at it, but of course I wasn't willing to go work for the IRS, and it's nearly impossible to get a job doing tax law unless you've worked for the IRS. Then I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've had, depending on how you count it, anywhere from 12 to about 20 businesses in my life. Currently, about 4 of them are ongoing or have just started in the case of the podcast. And I'd say 2 of the ongoing ones are successful, and the other 2 have the potential to be successful. But when I was, especially, I had a partner and my own firm for a while, and I got really into, like, I don't want to overpay my taxes, so I need to figure this out. Then I got into real estate. That's one of my ongoing things, is I own real estate. I own some houses, and I'm a small partial owner in some apartment complexes. And there's a lot of tax advantages that come from real estate. Like it is, I know people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and pay $0 in income taxes because of real estate. That's how good it is. And so, like, I learned a lot about it for myself. And then finally it was December of 2020. I was like, okay, I don't have any side things going on other than real estate. And frankly, I want to put more money into real estate, but I don't make enough of my day job to do it. What am I going to do? Okay, I'll start another business. And I can't even remember what course it was, but it was a course on like how to pick what you're going to do for your business. And it was kind of a pretty standard thing. I expect you have something like this. You know, you look at what do you know? What are people willing to pay for? What do you like doing? And if you can find something in those 3 circles, like, we'll try that out. And it's like, well, I know about taxes and I like screwing with the government. And certainly some people will pay me for that because I've paid people for that in the past. Okay, I'll give that a try. And reached out. Again, I thankfully know a lot of business people because I know a lot of attorneys, and some attorneys hired me. And then the real breakthrough was in January of that following year. Somebody who I had never met in person. We were on a community Discord, and I was just kind of like, "Hey, I'm doing this. Anybody interested? Please contact me." And he hired me and he paid me. And so it was like the first person I didn't know who hired me. It's like, "Hey, I think I have a business here." And then just grew it from there. But yeah, a lot of it was just I got to try something else. And again, it's like I mean, and Lord knows I know probably about 4 times as much as I know today as I did in December of 2020. But it was very much kind of okay, I don't know everything. I'm not going to be perfect. You know, let's say a perfect person could save somebody $10,000. So if I save them $5,000, I still help them. Like
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
still provided a very valuable service. Like, so I don't promise perfection. In fact, it's in all my engagement letters. Like, I'm not promising to give you perfect tax advice. I'm promising to give you tax advice that will help you. Because again, nobody knows the whole tax code, so no one can give perfect tax advice. But that's how I got into it. It was really I happened to know a lot about this and kind of be good at it, and just gave it a shot.
And it's been successful for you. I mean, especially for your clients, right? You've saved, I think it was $5,000 as the median, but you saved somebody up to 190,000. Is that the right number annually?
I need to look, and that 100+ thousand was a one-time thing.
Right.
I think he only saved about 20 grand a year after that.
Oh, poor guy.
So but yeah, like a lot of my clients, it's $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year. And that's not going to be forever because the tax code is going to change. So maybe it goes down, maybe it goes up in future years as things change. But yeah, it's especially for $100,000 a year, say net profit business, it's really easy to find somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 in tax savings if you haven't done any of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can take advantage of, and it sounds like you like checking the boxes and doing the paperwork to make that, or finding those loopholes and using the government's law against itself, which is a fun way to do it, I guess. That's, if you're gonna play in the tax game, It's fun to play against the government because they box themselves in a corner in a lot of ways.
It is, and the other thing is I love puzzles. Like I kind of like Sudoku. I actually prefer Kakuru, which is a similar game. I love all sorts of strategy games that like it's like, okay, you need to find the way to get the thing over there by whatever. Like Where's My Water? It's one of my favorite games of all time. Because it's just like it's a super simple rule set, but it's a super complicated, like how do I get from point A to point B? And so like the tax code and tax planning is like the ultimate puzzle because there's 1,000 rules and there's 1,000 facts, and it's like just how you and literally how you put the facts together, just what you call something can change it. So if you go to a seminar, well, the seminar usually is not going to be tax deductible. And even if it is, a lot of the time, certain parts of it may only be 50% deductible. But education is 100% deductible. Well, what's the difference between a seminar and like going to some place to get educated that maybe looks a lot like a seminar? Well, for the most part, it's what box do you put it in? I mean, there are some rules that say, no, this is not education. Like if it's a a trade show where it's just like people, like selling to each other, that's obviously not education. But when we met for the first time at Tom Woods' School of Life thing, and I had clients go there, and I definitely told all of them, it's like, hey, this is definitely educational. You're going to learn things about marketing. You're going to learn things about building your business, and you're going to make contacts as well. So this is absolutely slam dunk, for you going to qualify. Now, if you don't have a business, you can't do that. But it really is, and again, literally just where you put the number in a box. Another one has to do with there can be some great tax advantages to hiring your kids if you have any, particularly for a sole proprietorship. Well, if you put what you pay them down as a wage, you will cost yourself thousands of dollars in taxes. There's actually a separate box to put it in just for if you have kids, your kids working for you in a sole proprietorship, where you don't have to pay payroll taxes on them. and so that like literally, and it's amazing, like accountants don't know this. I reviewed one of my clients' tax returns before it went out, and their accountant had put the pay that they paid to their kids in the wrong box. And just really quick, that only applies to kids under the age of 18 as well. And just because I haven't said it yet, don't do anything I say about taxes without talking to somebody, because even if it works for 99% of people, it may not work for you.
Right. So I'm curious though, because a lot of this, what you're saying, there's different boxes, different people interpret things. But the IRS reviews how many million tax returns a year, but they don't review them, right? So how does the IRS work in like just a practical sense? Like how, like what they don't even know all the laws they have on the books. So what are they doing? How does the IRS work, and how do you kind of navigate that quagmire?
So there's a lot actually going on in behind the scene. It's basically algorithms. So they have computerized systems that look at everything and scan everything and basically say, they're looking for red flags. So there's a lot of red flags that just like people screw up. And so they have programming. If somebody does this and this and this, then you need to, flag this for a human being to look at it. And those same computer systems will just randomly flag individual returns to have reviewed by a human. And they don't tell everyone everything they're doing, because obviously, like if they say, well, this is what we're looking for, people will just stop doing that thing. But almost everyone I know basically assumes that they do like, okay, for like regular taxpayers making less than $100,000 a year, we're going to flag 0.01% of them to have a human being look at. And for people with a Schedule C, which is a sole proprietorship or a business but not an entity return, maybe we're going to audit 0.1% of those, or not audit, but just review, have a human being look at it. And even then, when a human being looks at it, a lot of times, again, if it was a red flag, they're just going to typically look at the red flag. And they may say, oh, no, that doesn't apply in this case. So one big red flag is if you have an LLC, they want to see you're paying payroll taxes to somebody. either yourself or you have employees or something like that. Well, if you just have an LLC that holds real estate, you actually probably don't owe any self-employed taxes to anybody, or employment taxes to anybody. But it's still just, oh, there's an LLC and we're going to have a human being look at this and they'll go, oh, it's real estate. Yeah, they don't actually owe that. It's fine. But again, a lot of it is just completely automated. Like the vast majority of returns, and I think it is like over 99%, no human being is actually looking at these days. They literally just, get processed by the computers. They look at it for any issues, and then the checks get sent out.
So why do they, I know they're not hiring all 87,000 that they talked about, but if it's all automated and it's all can be computerized, why do they need the budget for those new rush of 87,000 IRS agents? I guess they kind of pulled back on, but then kind of didn't. I'm not sure what the Congress just did with that, but
yeah, and even some of that was like they sometimes talk about human being equivalents. So like maybe they're going to acquire 40,000 people, but by technology, it lets them do twice as much work. So part of it is it will let them do more spot checks. So if they double the number of people, they can do twice as many spot checks. But really, actually, they want to do about the same number of spot checks, but then they want to do more thorough reviews on those spot checks, I think. And they do want to do more audits. And like most people have never been audited. You get a letter from the IRS. That's not an audit. Like most people, by the time they're 40, probably gotten some letter from the IRS saying, hey, we think the number is wrong because of this.
right.
Well, I mean, that's pretty simple to respond to. I got one of those when I was 18 years old, and I just responded to it. And actually, they owed me $3. It was great once I gave them the right numbers. But yeah, a lot of it is they want to be able to audit more people, and that is definitely one of the problems they're having. Is like they find enough returns that it would make sense to really investigate and consider an audit for, and they don't have the bodies to do it. Which, obviously I kind of say boo-hoo, too bad. But that's the goal, is they really, like, literally there are thousands of people who they would audit in a year, maybe tens of thousands of people who they would audit if they had the bodies to do it, but they don't. And so again, they kind of look at, well, and it's typically two things to look at. First, they look at the easy cases. Okay, this person just clearly is like committing fraud or doing something stupid, or it's super, super sketchy. Let's look at this. And then the second thing to look for is big dollars. So they're definitely, but not too big. Like they don't want to audit Bill Gates because he's going to hire attorneys and have them waste a bunch of time. And even if they win, like they probably lost. So they're looking at the people making $1 million, maybe $2 million a year, and those are like a prime target because they have enough money that if there's an error in the taxes, it could be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're not so wealthy that they have more resources than the IRS.
Right. So they're finding victims, basically.
Yeah. Again, at some point, like I don't want to call somebody who's that successful a victim. They're certainly being victimized. And again, the first group, they're people who either are just completely ignorant and so did something stupid, or they are actual tax cheats. And again, I don't have any major moral issue with that, since taxation is theft. But like, I don't like doing that. Just I think it's stupid. It's like the risks of that are so high. I don't do it, and then I don't work with people who do. And so, but again, like from a, say, even a small L libertarian, okay, we need a government, we need some sort of taxes. Like that first group is probably a reasonable group to go after. It's again, the second group, when you're looking at basically maximizing a return, that's not exactly what the government should be doing.
Yeah, the people that it really bothers me when they go after are the people that gross $1 million, but maybe net 150, 200,000 because they have a lawn care business that has, 6 trucks or something. And their margins are really not that big, but little mistakes on their taxes, which can get audited, and the IRS can say it's an extra $150,000. Well, that's their entire, payroll for themselves because they get paid out of the profits of the company. So there are people who are victims in this circumstance, even at that gross income level.
Well, absolutely. And like I remember, so I grew up in Colorado Springs, and if you're probably 25 or older and you grew up in Colorado Springs, you remember an ice cream shop called Michelle's. It was an institution. It had been in town for 60 years. It was actually founded by like a Greek immigrant family as a Greek restaurant, but they started doing ice cream and it took off. And I have super fond memories of this place. And when I was in college, I drove from Denver, visiting my family down to Colorado Springs to go to this ice cream place. Like that's what it meant to people. And they were closed, and it was an IRS notice on the door saying they had seized the shop and all the assets. And what had happened is the owners hadn't done anything immoral. They had done something foolish, which is they had hired a new manager a few years before. And that manager filled out all the paperwork saying he was doing the withholding, but instead of sending the withholding money to the IRS, he basically pocketed it. And so 2 years later, the IRS finally knocked on the door and said, yeah, you owe like $500,000 in withholding taxes. Where's the money? And well, they didn't have it.
It was stolen.
And it was stolen from them. But of course, that guy like had actually left the country at that point because he wasn't a complete moron. But again, they shut it down. And I mean, because they could show that none of the owners knew what was going on, really had any way of knowing what was going on, because all the forms were correct, all the money was coming out of the bank account correctly, it just wasn't going to the right place. That none of them got criminally prosecuted. And at some point, I do think they worked out a deal with the IRS where they weren't like, completely destitute for the rest of their lives, but it absolutely bankrupted them. And I mean, they were certainly a well-off family. Again, like they built up to like 4 different locations, and like I'm certain that the value of their business was well over $1 million, just from the goodwill alone, if nothing else. But like they got completely destroyed because, and again, they didn't even do the wrong thing. So like they absolutely were victims, not entirely of the IRS, but like again, in a realist, a human society, other human beings look at that sort of thing as like, okay, maybe you shouldn't have trusted that person. Maybe you screwed up, but it's like, I'm not going to destroy your life for that.
Right.
But the IRS basically said, no, we're going to destroy your life for that.
Yeah, they're taking it twice on the chin. Not only did they get robbed, they got robbed twice because the IRS came in and destroyed their life afterwards. So, all right, we're coming up on an hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time. What kinds of clients do you work with in agorist tax advice? So if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, hey, I have $100,000 business, but I'm just using a regular accountant, is that the type of person? Or I guess, what does your ideal clientele look like?
So I've got 2 major, I would say, common clients. The first is either a side hustle or a solopreneur or a small business, usually open for like 2 to 3 years. You're profitable, you're making at least 50 grand, ideally closer to 100 grand a year in profits, but you don't know anything about taxes. So like, there's things that can be done, but you don't know what they are. Probably, I would say 80% of my clients fall into that category. The second category are people, mostly business people, but sometimes just really high net worth individuals, but they've got their fingers in a lot of different pies. So these are people who typically have at least $5 to $10 million in assets, and they have a lot of different things going on that can affect their taxes. And so it's like, I may not talk with those people, for 3 months, but then I may, oh, hey, we're doing this thing, or we're doing that thing, or we want to set up a trust for our kids. How do we do that to minimize the taxes while still, doing what the trust is going to do? And so in that case, I worked with their trust attorney who drafted up all the documents, but I just made sure that the way some of the phrasing was gave a slightly better tax treatment. But yeah, definitely, my bread and butter is, again, this relatively new and small business that they haven't had the chance to learn what they should do. Things like, should I set up an LLC? Should I set up a corporation? How should I be taxed? Should I be taxed as an S corp or a C corp or a partnership or a sole proprietorship? I don't work with people who aren't in one of those 2 categories. Like, if you are just somebody who you have a day job and you want to start a business, go start the business. Go make $5,000. And then I'll talk to you. Like, I may not take you on as a client because I don't want to take someone on as a client that's going to pay me more money than I'm going to save you. but I'll certainly talk to you about that, and you can, at least we can see if you're a good fit. And for some of that, also look at, okay, like you started a business a month ago, you made $5,000, you expect to make $5,000 a month for the next 6 months. Yeah, we can definitely do something. Versus, okay, I've been in business for 3 years and made $5,000. Keep growing your business.
Yeah.
Because at some point, like until you're making money, you're not paying any taxes anyway. Or and there's not enough difference in what you can do to really change it. It's like, I tell this to a lot of my clients, don't spend 20 hours to save $10.
Right.
It makes no sense.
Calculate your own hourly wage before you waste that much time.
And the thing that actually worries me more, and I didn't have this policy early on, but I had several clients who hired me for, okay, how should I set up my business? And then they never got started. Like I've had clients, and I've had people contact me that I refuse to take as clients, that it's almost an excuse. Oh, I have to get all my ducks lined up before I get started.
Yeah.
And just, again, this is more business advice than tax advice, but don't do that. Go start your business. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, as long as it's not something dangerous where you're going to go, bankrupt if somebody gets hurt, don't worry about, should I be an LLC or a corporation or a sole proprietorship? Go make $1.
Yeah. Unless, I would say the one exception to that is if you have a high power career, like you're a attorney making $500,000 a year already, and you're going to go out and start your own, freelance practice or private practice. There might be, or copywriter that's in-house that's going to go out of house, and you had a $400,000 salary to start with, you're going to be successful. So it does make sense at that level to start right.
Yes. But that's, I mean, I find that to be a very rare thing. Again, even, like, I know attorneys who have side businesses, but it's not working as an attorney. It's doing something else. So again, like, yes, there is a place for, I'm staying in the same career. I'm just going to be working for myself instead of for somebody else. That can make sense. But even then, like one of my early clients was a contractor. Like, he was a guy working construction who wanted to do his own contracting business. Well, just because you're great in construction doesn't mean you know how to run a business.
Yeah.
And he never got it off the ground. And I think part of the issue was he spent like $30,000 to various attorneys, and only paid me about $1,000 of that, but like $30,000 to various attorneys and accountants and everything, getting everything set up, and then didn't have enough money to maintain the business while he got clients.
Yeah, I have a very ready, fire, aim philosophy when it comes to business, especially solo businesses, is get it off the ground, then figure out how to make it work. On the other end, you do have to aim at some point. You have to go back and readjust. So I was making $700,000 a year before I actually talked to a real tax advisor. I was just going to an accountant, and I gave the IRS so much money because I started an LLC on like legalinc.com or something. And when I finally got a team of accountants and lawyers, they said, we're going to restructure everything. You're now filing as an S corp. You're doing this. I saved a couple $100,000 the first time I actually hired a big team. Now, again, I have a different situation, but I wish I would have started when I hit that $200,000 mark or $100,000 mark.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are profiting $100,000 in your business, or even I would say $50,000 on any sort of like a side business or a part-time business, if you don't talk with me, talk to somebody, because like you've maybe waited too long at that point.
Yeah.
But certainly at $200,000, yeah, you've definitely waited too long, and you're definitely overpaying. And a good tax advisor doesn't cost you money; they save you money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my goal is always for a client to more than break even the first year they hire me. I won't take a client if they're not going to break even within 2 years. Again, I don't think it's ethical for me to do that. Like, if I'm going to save you $500 a year, it doesn't make any sense for you to hire me at a couple $1,000s.
Right. And, the beautiful thing about saving money on taxes is it's in some ways better than earning more money, because you pay taxes on more money you earn. You don't pay taxes on the money you save. So it's literally just goes.
Point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the point I made in the class I did for your people. Yeah. It's saving $10,000 in taxes is, for most people, almost like earning $15,000 more.
Yeah. All right. So where can people get in touch with you if they're in the right situation and they want to save some money on their taxes?
So the best place is going to be to go to my website, agorist, AGORIST, taxadvice.com, and then put /PL. That'll take them to a special page where they can set up a free 15-minute phone call with me. And also, I'm working on this. It may not be ready for the next couple of weeks, but there's going to be a download of literally 100 different business deductions that different businesses can use. So it's going to be kind of a starting place of looking at, well, am I spending this money? Save the money. But yeah, the best place to reach me to either schedule a call or to get that download once it's ready is going to be agorist.taxadvice.com/P as in Papa, L as in Lima.
Or as in Practical Liberty. And I will be sure to put that the link to that in the show notes here. And when you have that PDF ready, send it to me, and I can send people a link through my email so we can remind some people about that opportunity.
We'll absolutely do that. Thanks so much,
Matthew. Thanks so much for coming on today. This was I really enjoyed this conversation. I like ranting against the government, and it's been cool hearing a little more of your story, because we just talked straight facts last time. So it's been cool getting to know you a little bit.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciated it.
Hey, if you thought that video was good, please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks.